What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and show where I, Graham G.S. and Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're breaking down, finally, the Angle documentary from earlier this month that aired back, I think, on September 1st, the day of the Payback pay-per-view. Took me a while to finally watch it. It was well worth the wait. This was awesome. I have heard from other people that this is basically the same documentary that WWE already did for A&E about a year ago as part of the biography series, which I still have to catch up on all of those. They did an Angle one not last season, because the last season would have been a couple of months ago, the second season in 2022. And it's not the exact same documentary. A lot of the footage is the same, probably from the WWE side. And you can tell, I knew that going into this while watching this yesterday. You can tell from watching the WWE side and then compared to the background in his amateur wrestling stuff, that this felt like two different documentaries. Still an amazing piece of business overall. One of the best documentaries I've seen in a long time, if not ever. This was awesome. Almost 2 hours in length, about an hour 47. It was fantastic. But you can kind of tell that they spent a lot of time on the amateur wrestling stuff and not so much on his WWE career, aside from like his trials and tribulations and issues with alcohol and drugs and pills and stuff like that. That stuff, to me, I mean, they had to kind of touch upon it, obviously. It's all about Angle, is this documentary. And it's a big part of his story and the overall lesson of overcoming struggle and adversity and maintaining sobriety and stuff like that. But I feel like the WWE stuff specifically, they've already covered a lot in other documentaries. I haven't watched the 24 on Angle in a while. I'm sure I reviewed it here on the channel at the time, 6 years ago when they first put that out, when he first came back to the company in 2017. I'm sure. They had Dixie Carter for that one as well. I remember that when they aired that many years ago. This, to me, the first hour plus, had a lot more to do with his amateur wrestling background, his family, stuff that I'm sure was already on public record that I just did not know about. So, like, even, for example, the attire that he wore to the ring many times in WWE, I don't know if they mentioned it here, but when his trainer, which I'll get to, Dave Schultz, came to the mat for his amateur wrestling, match or whatever, it looked like the exact same gear that Angle would wear in WWE. I'm sure that was intentional. They didn't touch upon that here. I'm sure he's talked about it before. I did not know that while watching this. So this was amazing. Even if you have seen the biography on Angle from last year, watch this anyway. This was not a Peacock. It is a Peacock original, but WWE has a deal with Peacock where they put out one Peacock exclusive documentary a year. So if you don't live in the US, you don't get to see it, which is dumb. At least not legally or through the proper channels. Like the Ric Flair one was a Peacock exclusive. They put that at the tail end of 2022. And the Cody Rhodes one they did back in August. That was awesome as well. Both of those documentaries were great. And it's funny because Ric Flair was on this documentary being interviewed about Angle, and he said that Kurt Angle's story makes his look lame, which is 1,000% true. And I thought the Ric Flair one was also really, really good. This was just outstanding. I already had a lot of respect for Kurt Angle. This gave me even more respect for Kurt Angle and maybe a bigger fan of the guy than I already was. But yeah, again, watch this anyway, even if you have seen the biography. And I'll get to reviewing the biography at some point. It might take me a couple months, years. I don't know. I haven't watched any of them yet. There's a lot of them. I haven't really caught up yet, but I'll still watch that one anyway. This one probably puts that one to shame in terms of what they included, who they interviewed for it, the footage, the stories, everything. So we go back to the beginning here, and Kurt basically says to start this thing off, I want to be remembered for what I did in my lifetime. They talk about how he grew up in Pittsburgh, and I won't get into every single detail. It's a 2-hour documentary. I can only cover so much. But they talk about, which I did not know, that football was actually his first love. And his family only ever really bonded about sports. They were known as the tough guys, him and his brothers. They had a reputation for being tough guys. He only had one sister named Leanne. We hear from all the brothers, but we don't hear, I think, from most of the brothers, I think. I thought one of them went to jail. Maybe we heard from one of them here. And if one of them went to jail, they don't talk about it in this documentary. This was only a couple of years ago. And maybe he's not in this thing. I don't know. But he had a lot of brothers and siblings. He only had one sister. And I figured from the fact that she wasn't in this thing, that she probably was no longer alive or no longer in the picture. So we'll get to her later. The dad, though, was an alcoholic. And the dad was Kurt's biggest fan, Kurt said. The dad, I think, and maybe they mentioned this, or maybe I missed it. I think he got into an accident because of the alcohol. Maybe he got into an accident anyway, but I think it was due to an alcohol-related incident. He was in pretty rough shape, and he died 2.5 days later. And it was one of those situations where the Angle family had to pull the plug. The mom was like begging him not to go. I'll be the wife you've always wanted me to be. Like really heart-wrenching stuff. Even the sister, who was a kid at that point, jumped on top of the father in the hospital bed and said, please don't go. Begged him not to go. Just, again, terrible to have to hear that from your own family. And Kurt got emotional even reliving it in this documentary here in real time. So he talked about how he felt encouraged. So his dad passed away. He felt encouraged to play football on his first day of school, of college, that is, I believe. And he talked about how he played perfectly. But it came to a certain point where, I'm sorry, maybe that was high school, I don't remember. But either way, wrestling started outweighing his love for football. And his coach, as soon as he saw Kurt wrestle, he knew he'd be a state champ. He had that confidence in him. He talked about beating a gentleman named Sylvester Takai in the 1993 state finals, despite being outweighed and clearly not outclassed necessarily because Kurt won, obviously, but it wasn't a fluke. He was a much smaller opponent for Sylvester. And as opposed to the other way around, Kurt had this giant mountain to overcome here, and he still won. He started training for the Olympics, and his confidence got crushed, and he didn't really know why, so he started training under Dave Schultz, who was like a world-renowned wrestling coach, did exhaust training to make sure he never got tired. Hearing Kurt talk about the training that he went through for the Olympics makes sense of everything, like his entire in-ring style in WWE. The guy would never get fucking tired. And he was extremely strong and agile and stuff. And it would make sense after hearing him talk about this. The guy would just never get exhausted. And that would make sense. He talked about how he trained almost 10 hours a day, almost every day, 28 out of 30 days of the month for 2 straight years. Won another title. And then we hear about DuPont, who we had heard about a little bit earlier on in the documentary, who I think Schultz had worked for. DuPont kills Schultz. And this was right before the Olympics. And just they show the news clippings of Schultz getting killed. So Kurt's coach gets killed right before the Olympics, right before he's supposed to start. And Schultz's wife started the Dave Schultz Wrestling Club in her husband's honor. And she wanted Kurt to be the first one. And companies would sponsor it. It was a really cool thing. During this whole process, he broke his neck during a match. And he still carried on. Not only that match, but beyond that, because he had to win the U.S. Open. And if he won the U.S. Open, he could avoid this whole tournament to then advance to the Olympics. And he won this matchup to win, to avoid going through the tournament. And he ended up winning the U.S. Open, beating the person who won that tournament, and he found out soon after that he broke his vertebrae. He didn't know at that point that his neck was broken, but his neck was getting cracked, and he was like, hey, like, don't do that. I think there's something wrong with it because it just doesn't feel right. I would feel sharp pains through, like, my arms and back and whatever, so please don't do that. Found out after he won the U.S. Open that he broke some vertebrae in his neck. And he was also told, you could die if you're dropped on your head. So he didn't get it fixed. And he still wrestled anyway. I guess he was still medically cleared. Either he didn't tell them, or they just thought, listen, I mean, they said that he could die if he was dropped on his head. And if he knew that at that point, I can't imagine they would still let him wrestle. Because why would they let the guy wrestle if he could fucking die? I don't know. But still, all of his opponents in this next tournament that he had in the Olympics, I think themselves, knew that the guy was injured. And he faced the guy named Dan Shade, or the guy in the U.S. Open, in the finals of it anyway. I think that was when he found out. He knew that he was injured, and he fucked up his neck anyway. Like, he would push on it, like, he didn't care, and Kurt knew that he was injured against this guy previously. He had wrestled him before, and the guy knew that he was hurt, so he would continue to hurt him anyway. That's just how it worked. And he was on Novocaine, and he said that it would make him pain-free, and he won, and he qualified for the Olympics. So the Novocaine was the first indicator that he would have a painkiller addiction later on. So he went on to the Olympics, faced an Iranian in the finals, beat him, and he knew going into it that he couldn't take home a silver. Like he said, 4 more years. I think he was kind of thinking, if I need to, I can win gold next time. He wasn't taking home a silver this time, though. And he ended up winning the gold. And they recapped the whole story and the match and whatever. It was really cool. They recapped the crazy year that he had. And he realized he didn't have to stress anymore. He didn't have to train anymore. That was it. And then he also wondered the next day, he wakes up the next day, well, what do I do now? That was all he ever trained for. All he ever wanted was to win that Olympic gold medal. And he did that. But now what does he do? And he talks about how he didn't want to do pro wrestling initially. The funny thing is, they don't talk about it here. This is one thing I did know that they don't talk about here. was that he was approached by WWE immediately after winning the Olympics. And they talked about it in a news clipping that they showed here. He was on Jay Leno or another talk show. He was on Jay Leno, but I don't know if it was the Jay Leno talk show or another one, where they asked him about WWE. And he was like, no. Like, he literally immediately said no. Immediately turned it down. And WWE had come to him in 96 about joining WWE, and he said no. And then I think it might have been due to the ECW thing, right? Where, like, it was there was, like, someone getting burned at the stake, something like ridiculous. Like, it had to do with a stake, like some sort of like christening or whatever in ECW angle, some sort of dumb angle they were doing that kind of scared him from doing the whole pro wrestling thing. He ended up changing his mind after he saw Stone Cold Steve Austin. Steve Austin caught his interest, and Kurt was like, well, can I go back and take that deal you were offering me previously? And Jim Ross said no at this point, because they were offering him like millions of dollars for like a 10-year deal or whatever, which is what Mark Henry ended up taking. And what ended up happening was they were like, no, we already offered you this deal, and you said no, so now you have to work your way back up through the bottom. And that's exactly what happened. So they talk about his debut, and they kind of rushed the whole WWE run thing because, again, we've heard about it a million times. They don't talk about every little thing that he did. But they talk about how he got booed during his debut. They quickly turned him heel. And it came to him really quickly. And at this point, we hear from Stone Cold himself and The Rock, two great gets for this thing, who know Kurt very well. And they praise not only his in-ring ability, and you knew you were getting an amazing match from Kurt Angle, but they talk his entertainment value and the "you suck" chain, and how he worked well and had great chemistry with literally everyone he stepped in the ring with. We hear from his wife, Giovanna, who is like almost 20 years younger than him. So if you're wondering, well, she looks really young. Well, it's because she's like 36 now and he's 54. So I guess whatever that means, or whatever that matters to you, whatever. There's an 18-year difference between the two. But his wife, Giovanna, talks about their first date at Applebee's, which was interesting, and how he broke his neck again in early 2003 at No Way Out 2003. But he wrestled at WrestleMania anyway against Brock Lesnar, after meeting like his neighbor, and like it was a kid, and the kid was like, oh, I hear you're not wrestling at Mania. And he was like, yeah, that's true. And then he's like, well, I really wanted that match with Brock. Like, I really wanted to see it. And Kurt Angle looked at this like DirecTV magazine on the table, basically implying that this kid changed his mind to wrestle anyway. Again, how he was cleared to do this after breaking his fucking neck, I have no idea. But he did the match anyway. And so after that, he was going to do the surgery, and he did this surgery where he was told that he could be out for only 6 weeks, which sounds really suspect, and he was. But he came back, and Brock again broke his neck with a chair shot, delivering the chair shot the wrong way, and instead doing it over the head, which was fucking dumb. It broke Kurt's neck again. And then he broke his neck for a fourth time at Mania 20 against Eddie Guerrero. And at that point, he knew he had to be out for a while, and he was out of the ring for the better part of 2004, I think, before coming back maybe in time for SummerSlam. But then he broke his neck again in early 2006, and they recapped the footage of him facing Randy Orton at One Night Stand. Just ridiculous. So they recap all of the injuries that he's had over the course of his career. Torn hamstring, broken neck, 150 stitches on the head, all this crazy shit. And he's like, otherwise I'm fine, which was funny. So as a result of that, he started taking opioids. That was really the whole transition here as to why they started talking about the injuries. He started with 4 painkillers a day to 8 painkillers a day. And Vince, it got to a certain point where he was like, it was really bad. And Vince told him to get off the stuff, and it was really bad. He talks about his sister starting to do drugs and how she kept calling Kurt for money. This was 2003, I think, I'll get to that in a second. But Kurt sent her money, and he found out she was just using it for drugs. And she was $35,000 in debt. So he said, listen, I'll give you a ultimatum. You move here to Pittsburgh with our mom. She'll take care of you. And if you do that, I'll give you money. And it worked initially, but then she relapsed. And he gave her another ultimatum. If you don't get clean, I'll never talk to you again. She didn't get clean, so we never talked to her again. Sure enough, 8 months later, she dies after an overdose. And he gets really emotional talking about that as well. Just a really, really bad situation. But it was the next day after finding out his sister died that he had the 60-minute Iron Man match on SmackDown with Brock, which is arguably either the greatest Iron Man match of all time or one of. Definitely one of his best matches ever. And he went out there and killed it. Went out there and fucking killed it. And that was despite the circumstances. And he didn't want to do it initially, but he thought doing it would get his mind off of it, which it did, so it worked. And then after that, he talks about how he ended up taking 65 Vicodin a day, which was fucking nuts. And Vince rightfully told him, listen, you are going to die if you don't go to rehab. And that was what led to his release and his departure from WWE. But then he immediately joined TNA. And it was funny because they used TNA footage here, which was great. Not a lot, but they show footage of his match with Samoa Joe and among other people during his TNA run. And Steve was like, well, you're going to TNA, son. That's a second-rate promotion. Like, they were nice enough to give you footage for this fucking documentary, but then you're immediately shitting on them, which was so funny. I mean, Stone Cold, I'm not surprised. He never worked TNA. But still, I thought that was funny. So we talked about how he started mixing the alcohol with the pills, and he got 4 DUIs in 5 years. That was TNA in a nutshell. They were employing a lot of fucking messed up people at that point with some of the shit they were getting away with. Between Kurt Angle and Jeff Hardy, they had a lot of alcoholics on their roster and a lot of people they just willingly employ, just thinking, okay, it's going to bring us star power and it's okay. I mean, Dixie really did him a favor by keeping him employed, because maybe he would have died otherwise, who knows, but still, it was not a good situation. He didn't think he was a drug addict, so he thought he had nothing wrong with him. It wasn't until he went to jail for the 4th time that Giovanna, his wife, almost didn't pick up the phone from the call, because he called her from jail, and she was almost didn't pick up the phone, picked up the phone anyway, and said, listen, why did you do this? And she was threatening to leave him, like, listen, I will leave the kids, or I will bring the kids with me, but I will leave you if you don't get help. And that's when he got help. So he went to rehab finally, talks with a feeling of withdrawal, the worst thing he's ever experienced. While in rehab, this would have been, I think, 2013, because he was off TNA TV for about 2 months, because I think he was in rehab, and then he came back in time for October's Bound for Glory pay-per-view, again, if I'm not mistaken. So now he does maintenance training to kind of maintain the pain from all the injuries he suffered over the course of his career. He had a lot of surgeries in the last couple of years, specifically last year, had a big, I think, double knee replacement surgery, if I'm not mistaken. I interviewed him last year about this documentary, actually. And he talked about, it was like right either before that or after that he had the surgery and he was doing better. So just crazy shit. But he does all that to kind of maintain his sobriety, because if he goes back on the painkillers, he could get addicted again. He just has that personality. So that's what he's doing to kind of maintain the pain from the injuries. And then he talked about how he wasn't around for his first daughter, and he regrets that. So he spent a lot more time. He has spent a lot more time with his kids in recent years, and he likes to be a great father. Giovanna talks about that. The other people on the show talk about it. Mark Henry, and they replay his Hall of Fame speech when he comes back to WWE in 2017, and he says that he wants people to remember that he was a fighter. And that was it. So we hear from a lot of talking heads in this documentary. It was an amazing documentary, but we hear from Stone Cold, Rock, like I said, Dave Schultz's wife, a lot of the people that he trained with, all of his brothers. His mom may have probably passed away a long time ago, I would imagine. She wasn't in the documentary. We see footage of her. I don't know if she's still alive. I'm not sure. But we hear from a lot of family members, people that he trained with, from the Foxcatcher group as well. We hear from Mark Henry, who at this point when they were doing the doc may have still been in WWE. I don't know. It said 2021 on there, so they may have done this in 2021. Who knows? Jim Ross was definitely in AEW when they did this. And they still put him in anyway, which I thought was really cool. We hear a lot from Jim Ross because he knew Kurt very well. And a lot of other people as well, his wife, among others. So I thought that was awesome. And again, just an amazing, emotional documentary. They did a tremendous job with it. I haven't seen the biography. I will watch that at some point. I'm sure they just cover the WWE stuff and a lot of his issues, of course, as well, I'm sure. This was basically a dark side of the ring, no pun intended, on drugs, on steroids, in the sense that there was a lot more talking heads, people that knew Kurt, and it wasn't just the dark stuff either. It ended on a very positive note because Kurt's doing a lot better now. Loved it. Really love this documentary. Definitely make time to watch it when you can. It's called Angle, and it's on Peacock right now. And thank you guys for checking out my review of it. I know it took some time. I finally took the time to watch it. But here we are. We finally reviewed it. So keep an eye out for other reviews and content here on the channel relating to this sort of stuff, whether it be documentaries or other original content WWE does on Peacock, the network, whatever. I appreciate your support. Be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. I'm Graham G. Matthews. Have an awesome one, guys, and I'll catch your ass down the road.